Okay, so for the last 4 years, I have been teaching myself to day trade. Um, 3 years in, I have moved to futures trading, and for the last 11 months, I've been trading ICT concepts. I felt as if I've had my most confident moments in the market. I've kind of had my best performances and I've had the best understanding of what price wants to do. I think the idea of price being fractal, being the same thing on every single time frame, has kind of occurred during ICT. And essentially, I will read it in every single session. With my own little twist, there are a few things I do include, which ICT, of course, does not do. The one, of course, as you can see on my screen, is SMAs. This is a recent introduction, but the idea here of me creating this content is more so for myself. I record or I take images of multiple sessions, multiple different sessions, and how I saw price, what was my bias before, what happened after. For example, every New York session, I'll usually put a smaller time frame graph. What was the confirmation? What was the bias? Followed with at least a 1 hour or 4 hour chart as well. It's just a method of me recording my information. I have what we thought happened versus what happened, where essentially with before session opens on New York, 4 hour, 1 hour, and 5 minute charts. What did the price look at? What was my bias? Where did I think price was going to go? And of course, what happened after? How did it work? Was there a setup short, setup long, etc., etc.? And so essentially, the idea video is another way to record my information. And so yeah, so the other two recorded sessions do images. Like New York session would be, of course, London and Asia. Of course, I'm not American. I do have access to, or have better time access to trade both London and Asia. So sometimes I will do so if the setup is right. So essentially, let's go and have a look at an Asia recording session and see how did I think price was going to react. Was I bearish? Was I bullish? And so yeah. So I didn't look at Asia, for example, this morning till PS price sold off in the first hour of trading. Till price sold off. So I was familiar with the bearish price action that we've had over the last few days. Of course, we had the 4 hour inverse fair value gap in this case. And then, of course, price is holding the 1 hour fair value gap after a strong sell-off. So I went more so bearish into the sessions, or at least Asia session, and I was looking for probably lower prices. The other note is SMAs. So the idea is SMAs are not for entries, it's just to try and get an idea, a simple idea of what bias is. Is price bullish, is it bearish? Essentially, if you're above the SMAs, you can assume a more bullish bias, below, etc., etc. In this case, in the 5 minute, usually I like to see the 5 minute line. Say if I'm bearish, I'd like to see price under 20 SMA, etc. This is not always the case. Sometimes you will take session or trades which are kind of against that higher time bias of the SMAs, but it's just something just to lower the variance of my trades. So in terms of this Asia session, I was more bearish. I'm not gonna lie, definitely more bearish. I saw the sell-off, and I'd like to see some sort of continuation lower. And price didn't really give me much. This early expansion, early expansion was interesting. Price moved up with the Asian macro, had a strong expansion up, and of course got above the 5 minute 20 SMA, and there was any chance for a long setup there if you really want to trade price. But again, I was bearish, so it was just me of an observation. Was price essentially trying to generate some sort of liquidity? Was there some low resistance liquidity in there? Was price going to form up a setup short? And after watching price, what I did notice was that there was a SMA, or not an SMA, a SMT that formed with ES. I believe ES formed a lower low. Not quite sure whereabouts. ES formed a lower low. Formed a higher high here, which was a lower low on this time frame. Excuse me. So essentially, this was my one trade that I took so far during this Asia. I saw this inverse fair value gap matched with bearish price action overall on the higher time frame, change stand delivery as well, assisted entry, and this is my first trade short where I attempted to target these lows which were created in this 7 a.m. macro. Maybe I was a bit too greedy, but I saw good price delivery, and of course I saw the SMA hold bearish again, which just gave me another confirmation of good price action. Maybe my mistake at this point was putting my stop to break even. Of course I entered a short with the close of that candle. Stop was originally at the high and I was targeting these lows. Once price kind of trickled down here, I put my stop to break even. It stopped me out. Break even, and eventually it does take this minor low, which wasn't a price target, but it didn't eventually go down there. But yeah, I did eventually go down to the minor buy side low, but not sell side. And of course, in this case here, it reverses up and goes stronger. But yeah, in this case here, you had kind of your early displacement followed by a manipulation move, and then the S&T inside 9 p.m. macro in this case was a small displacement move for a nice little entry short. If you were very pessimistic about how far price could go, maybe you could have targeted that small low, taken 25 points out of it, but that was Asia. That was the Asia session, and it was not the greatest, but essentially did provide a high quality A+ setup. The next session of the day was London session. Usually London session, of course, always begins at 3 a.m. Always begins at 3. And in this case here, during Asia, we had already taken these lows that I was essentially targeting from here during early in the Asia session. You have your midnight open, usually is very algorithmic level. And in this case here, price had already sold off. It took the major low that we had here on the 4-hour and the hourly candle. Essentially at this point here, when I looked at it, I wasn't quite interested at all in anything to do with price. I saw these relative equal highs, or these highs that Asia created, but I was more bearish on price overall. Price had already sold off, and so essentially you did have a good long setup here, which were of course a reclaim of the 20 moving average, 20 SMA, inverse fair value gap here as well for an entry on the 5-minute. And I believe this was a very bullish opening to the session. Yep, 3 a.m. macro expanded higher, and I think we eventually took Asia highs in the session. And so essentially this entry here would have been the highest probability for any kind of short. But essentially, possibly there was an entry short here, but it would have been a entry that would have needed to be taken on a smaller time frame, possibly the 1 minute in this case. And I believe the 4 a.m. possibly would have given you a nice little inverse fair value gap set up short. Yeah. In this case here, speed this up. Eventually price did start to sell off. With the 5 a.m. macro, it saw sell off, and it at least took, I believe, the equilibrium of the range here. Yep, as expected. So it made sense for a strong expansion initially. We had a 5-minute inverse fair value gap, which confirmed here with macro and eventually the reclaim of the 20 SMA, which gave you some sort of entry short or some sort of entry long. Excuse me. You had a good target here with Asia highs. Price went strongly, and then once it came into the 4 a.m. macro, you eventually did get a good short for at least the equilibrium of the range. In this case, it went here lower and took some minor buy side liquidity and started hunting this model back down. But that was London session. Going into New York now, if I'm really curious, had a strong sell-off here around 7:15. This could be news during this market. I'm not quite sure. I'm more bearish on price. These lows here look kind of obvious on the higher time frame, but I believe there is an SMT. No, there's no SMT at the moment. SMT divergence, I mean. But I'm more bearish. This low from yesterday. Low yesterday makes a lot of sense for price to go to. It's about looking for some sort of high probability entry, looking for time to align. At the moment I see nothing. You've had a strong expansion down. It's also the last session before a long weekend in the States. So I will probably proceed with the next few hours of caution. If I see anything good, something similar to what I took during Asia, then of course I'll take it, no problem. But yep, it's really just a video on how I record information. Thanks for watching.